Hey, y'all, thanks again for listening to Drew Tessier's Mostly Queer Comedy Podcast. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review. You can follow me at Drew Tessier NYC. And if you want to see it live, you can watch this on YouTube.
It's Drew Tessier's Mostly Queer Comedy Show. Let's talk, y'all.
Hey, y'all, welcome to another episode of Drew Tessier's Mostly Queer Comedy Podcast, where I interview mostly queer comedians and kind of their path into comedy and sexuality and where those lines sort of blur. I'm here today with truly one of my comedy heroes. Kevin Allison runs a fabulous storytelling show called Risk. He is going to get to talk tons, I promise. But before we do, I have to fangirl out for a second and talk about why this particular interview means so much to me. So I graduated high school in 1997. So my late junior high, early high school, that was peak MTV years. And of course, you know, the wonderful music coming out of Seattle and all that. But in addition is when they really started playing with the format and bringing in some oddball comedy shows. Daria, Liquid Television, Beavis and Butthead, Tom Green. And in 1994, this sketch comedy show hits that just touches my sweet spot like no other show ever has, except for, honestly, some of the other content that has come out from the creators of this particular show. And this is before Will and Grace. This is before, there's nobody gay on TV. And seeing a show where there is an openly gay man, a young man, willing to get on MTV and I know you will probably argue with me and say maybe the confidence, but to just get on TV and be like, I'm gay, who cares? Let's make jokes. And this show had such big theater kid energy. And in my opinion, was the cool weirdos who sort of, and I, you know, you guys, you know, understanding your history now and how you met in college, you know, and I had not gotten to college yet and met my community of cool weirdos. You guys were my idols. And I mean, colored all of my vernacular in high school, you know, $250 worth of pudding. I'm going to stick my balls in it. I'm Doug. I'm out of here. I mean, these were the phrases of my, and I'm so excited to have you here today. And I want to talk a lot about Risk and your show and everything, but let's start at the beginning. You're from Ohio, right?
Yes, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was born in 1970 and pretty much knew I was gay as soon as consciousness started to bubble up in my head. Yeah, I was, you know, I wasn't diagnosed with severe ADHD until I was 49. But when they explained, oh, the H part for you is hypersexuality, I was like, oh, yes, it is.
So you got diagnosed with gay late in life.
Yes, because I had an occasion to talk to the woman who used to live next door to me. And she was like, oh, yeah, you were trying, when you were in diapers and my son was in diapers, we were born like the same month, you were trying to get him out of his diapers. So yeah, I was a really, really precocious kid, kind of knew I was gay and was terrified of going to kindergarten because I was afraid everyone would find out.
Oh, that early, wow.
Yeah, and it was the first day of kindergarten, waiting in line, you know, single file line to go into our classroom, when a kid pointed to my hair and says, why is your hair orange? And another kid said, it's not orange, it's red, like the head on the dick of a dog. And they started laughing at me and saying that, and I was like, oh, thank God, they're making fun of me for my hair. That'll distract them from finding out that, you know, I'm weird inside. But it was that day, first day in class, that I started when we were all supposed to have our heads down, you know, during like nap time after milk and cookies. Right. I started doing a little silent comedy bit for a girl across the room and made her laugh. And that was a eureka moment for me. I was like, oh, this is how I make it, you know, make people like me by making them laugh so they'll know, oh, yeah, he's weird in ways, but we already kind of like him. You know, in other words, control why they're laughing at me.
That, and I mean, I think for those of us that don't know how to connect with other people, because it seems like everybody else has got this blueprint and just understands, sort of, heterosexual dating and all the normal stuff that happens. And then those of us, and I assume I was raised in a very conservative environment. And you're Catholic as well, right? Or raised Catholic?
Super
Same.
Catholic. Yeah.
And, just never, I never once had an adult say, it's fine to be gay. There are other gay people. Gay people exist. I never heard anything like that growing up. So,
Oh.
I mean, I think that's where we do develop that humor is this is how we're going to get in.
My dad, I was trying to think of a word other than fag to call my sister when I got really mad, because that was just the word everyone called everyone for the worst thing you could call. So I was trying to think of something that might be worse, and I called her the N-word. And my father grabbed me and threw me up a flight of stairs,
Wow.
and I bounced off a wall. And my father is the gentlest, most loving guy you could ever meet. And at that, I must have been like 8 years old when this happened. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, so it's okay to call people fags,
Sure.
but definitely not the N-word, And that really kind of struck me, that there was such social consciousness in my family, but not about that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said that the worst two things you could be when I was coming through was either fat or gay. I mean, those were like and what I loved about, the state is, again, sort of in just a celebration of goofiness and everything, but at that time, if the word gay was said, or if a character was gay in any sort of way, it was always, the punchline was homophobia. Whether it was Friends, whether it was SNL, even other sketch comedy shows that I adored, like with, In Living Color, the Men on Football sketch, and stuff like that. But it was always, and that wasn't true with you guys. Like, I loved that. Now, you guys all met, how did you get from, I guess, Ohio to New York?
Well, I went to NYU to go to film school, and my first week there, it was, I think, during orientation that I saw Joe Latrulio walking through one of the hallways, and I thought he was so hot.
And he was.
He was. And he had he dressed very Miami Vice at that time. And so I kind of spied on him as he was doing drop ad with a counselor, and I dropped and added into the class that he was getting into. And his first movie that he made in this class, because we were in film school, was all about his girlfriend back home in Florida. So I was like, oh, all right, that kind of dashes that hope. But at the end of that class, toward the end of that semester, he gave everyone a flyer and said, hey, I'm in a comedy group. Everyone should come tonight. And that's when I saw the new group that night, and it was really one of those eureka moments. It was like such an amazing show. Their first show.
Right. So, and that was, that's right, because it was there was the first sketch comedy group, and then the new group came, and then eventually.
Right.
And you're one of two that were not in that very first wave of the new group, right?
Yeah, Tom Lennon and I were added roundabout, I guess, the same. Tom was added to the group, and then I was added to the group within a couple of months of each other. I think in our junior year, but we were friends of the group, nevertheless, for freshman and sophomore year as well. Yeah.
So I just want to show this to them real quick. So in preparing for this interview, if you, like me, are a super fan of the state and want to know what happened and how it all happened, this is what happened and how it all happened.
Oh my
it is
gosh.
such a good book, and it's set up like a Vulture oral presentation in a way where there isn't a narrative. It's just each one of them speaking in their own words and then cobbled together to tell the story from which it talks about you having the crush on him and sort of how you found the group, but also what you guys, I mean, were inseparable. I mean, once you formed that group of 11, I mean, just you guys ate together, slept together, drank together, and that was the entirety of your lives.
Yeah. So we all met in 1988, and the group became more important to us than graduating from NYU or anything like that. It was, we had this real sense that, oh, wow, there is a chemistry among us, and we should try to make something of this as soon as we can out of school. So, yeah, we were constantly hanging out with each other. Now, some of the members of the group also had other other friends of
Friends.
other circles of friends. Yes, so I had my gay friends and my comedy friends,
Right.
and I'll never forget there was. When we were on You Wrote It, You Watch It at this point. So we had become friends with Jon Stewart. And I decided, let me try to make my two circles meet, my gay friends and my comedy friends. So we were having, myself and my roommate were having a Valentine's Day party. And I had cut out little heart-shaped hearts out of the anuses in a bunch of porn magazines.
Sure.
And put them all over the wall for Valentine's Day. And all my gay friends showed up.
Yeah.
And one comedy friend showed up, and it was Jon Stewart, who was with someone else I didn't know. And he walked through, and he's looking at the anuses on the wall, and he was like, looked around the room, and he's like, I am at the wrong party.
I wondered about that because I make a joke on stage about being the only gay person I'd ever met and being the only gay person in a theater department. So I wondered if you did have, because you were in New York, another group, because I was sort of always the gay guy as well. But
It was just such a part of. So I come from a family with 5 kids and was the middle child and gay and ADHD. So I just naturally was the in his own universe one,
Sure.
the black sheep, the kind of the weirdo kid. And the kid who was most likely to like want to be shut up in my room rather than like with everyone else. And that kind of happened again in the state where it was like, oh, he's off in his own universe. And I was the one who would most often not socialize with the rest of the group because I was so obsessed with mostly going to sex clubs or bathhouses or whatever the hell it was. So I was always having these adventures. And when we got to MTV, that's when I was like, look, I sometimes feel like the odd man out so often. And I feel like some of the jokes the group makes are hurtful toward me because everyone in the group had to prove they weren't a theater fag. Right. So I said, why don't we have a check-in as the first thing we do in the morning when we arrive at MTV? Just for a half hour, go around the room and everyone say how they're feeling, right? And we had done it for a few days, and by the 3rd day or so, Tom Lennon said, well, of course Kevin wanted these check-ins, because he's always got some incredible story about whatever madness he was up to in some sub-basement in the meatpacking district last night.
who's gone on to play. It's interesting to go back, because I've been rewatching the show to sort of prepare for this, and it's one thing that I found interesting, and I do want to kind of go back and talk about how the show came to be and all that as well, but one female character, or one female actress in the band of 11, and then all the other characters being played by men in drag. And again, not with the punchline being, like where you see Monty Python and it's got the high talking voices, and anytime they play a woman, like it's played straight, so to speak, and in sincerity. But it was interesting to see that, including you, most of you hated doing the drag characters.
It was so fun. I always felt like I kind of looked like and took on some of the characteristics of my mom. So that was a little difficult. Yeah. Isn't that funny? But now, it's so funny to look back at stuff, because now I'm always showing pictures of me back in the state in drag, because I'm like, oh, I look pretty good, actually,
I mean, I thought several of you did, and again, played it with such sincerity. And, yes, of course, there were a couple skits I was like, ugh, but for the most part, they did not skew homophobic, I didn't feel.
Yeah, there was a sketch that I wrote that MTV, put their foot down and said, we can't do this. It was kind of an addendum to the sketch called Job Interview, where I am this hard-nosed, big corporate boss who is interviewing Joe Latrulio for, like a junior position or whatever at this firm or whatever it was. and it turns out that I'm just like sexually harassing
Right,
him.
right,
It turns
right,
out I just like, and I keep switching from the hard-nosed stuff to the, do you think I'm nice? That kind of stuff. And at the end of it, I've explained to him that what I really want for him is to give me piggyback rides and shout something. There's something very fetishistic. So at the end, he's riding off with me on his shoulders, and the way it originally ended, you pass Tom Lennon looking at the camera, explaining that this is what will happen if we accept the homosexuals in our society. And he went off on this big, it was very much like a Reefer Madness kind
Right,
of
of course.
beware America,
Yeah.
And MTV was just like, look, too many people are not going to get that and are just going to flat out agree with it.
Right. God, that's funny. There was a sketch. I mean, because of course the one that first comes to mind when I think of you is the Jew, the Italian, and the redhead gay, obviously. But there was a sketch in the third season. I feel like there was one episode that my boyfriend and I were watching it last night that we were like, I mean, this feels like a love song to you almost. This one episode in the third season where you were in several of the sketches. And I do want to say, because I meant to point this out, the very, very first sketch on the very first episode, the very first line is delivered by you.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the first over this. I mean, there wasn't even yes, there was an openly gay cast member with SNL at one point, but.
And Scott Thompson.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, but
Yeah.
wasn't treated great, But so I thought that was very cool that you're the first person to sort of introduce the show onto MTV, in just sort of a fun queer history sort of way. But there's this one particular sketch about this high school character who's supposed to be the popular guy, and he's openly gay, and it opens with him hitting on a guy in a locker room. Also, Joe again, right?
Yeah.
Seeing a theme here. But you're not playing the gay guy. You're playing the homophobic coach, right?
Yeah.
But the whole plot of this thing is, that he's gay and he's hitting on and the jocks think it's cool and the girls think it's cool, and then it ends up he's not gay. He's been lying about it, and the school's like, boo. That sketch, though, I felt was premonition. That could be a movie on Disney Channel today. No, it absolutely could, because now I don't even recognize TV now, because now the gay kids are the cool kids, and
It's true. It's true. Yeah, the irony of it might be lost. I specifically remember I based my coach character on George C. Scott in Doctor Strangelove.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. That's okay. Funny. That's so funny. So to go back in history a little bit, so you're in college. You guys all meet each other. The sketch comedy. I mean, I guess were you guys sort of? I mean, were you popular on campus? Because you were getting big crowds.
Yeah.
While you were still in school.
That very first show, I mean, it was only like a black box, so it must have been 50 people in there. But
Still, that's a sellout for college.
Yeah, totally. It was incredibly well received, and that's what struck me I was like, boy, the energy in this room, it feels like, even though everyone is seeing this group for the first time, it feels like we and they feel like this is classic material. It felt kind of like going to see Monty Python a couple of years ago in Britain when I saw it, where it was like, no, this is a brand new stuff, not greatest hits. But yeah, the group, you could tell that the group itself was so excited about how it was being received and about how it was going. Also the group was notoriously insular. There were 11 of us, so, and there was always that pushing and pulling of pushing people out. I mean, it was originally 16.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So there was a lot of competition and rivalry and pushing people out and all that sort of thing. And
Was there ever anybody else queer in the group, or even slightly? Or was
that's a good question. Maybe in the original 16 there might have been someone who was in there for like a day or so. Yeah. But it was kind of funny because I really didn't know if other members, when we were in college, if other members of the group might be bisexual or if anyone else might be gay, and we might learn that later. But I myself I came out to the rest of the group in sophomore year. We went to visit Showalter. He was at Brown University.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And classic Showalter, he had invited us down, then forgotten to tell us he was on his way to New York. So he gave us the keys to his dorm room as he's leaving to go to New York, where we've just arrived from. But we had taken mushrooms in the car before coming into. So here we are, we're arriving somewhere, and we're like starting to trip. None of us knew the campus of Brown University or anyone on it. So it was a crazy time. It was a wild and fun adventure of a weekend. And in the car on the way back, that's when I came out to whoever was on that particular trip, and then had to come out to the other members once we were back at NYU. And everyone was perfectly fine with it, and I started wearing pink triangle buttons regularly. Because this was at the height of ACT UP and Queer Nation and all of that. And I started a group called Out Artist. Myself and my roommate started a group called Out Artist, which was the first gay club at Tisch.
Wow.
Very
cool.
Oh, it was so awesome. Like, I remember, we had some people like Christine Vachon came in at one point, Todd Haynes. It was great. We just had various artists come in and talk about being gay.
I love that. And there were times I had read in the book there was a period when you guys were talking about how often, and this is one thing I forgot to bring up. You guys were not an improv group. I mean, you guys were very much a rehearsed, polished. Ran it, which I think also shows just the brilliance of the humor that you guys were doing. In the same way, it makes me think of sort of Steve Martin in a way. When you look at his early stuff and it looks like it's chaos but it has been so perfectly, he knows where the laughs are. He runs it. It was the same, I feel like, with you guys, but there was at one point that you guys, a big group of you were in two different dorm rooms and had taken all the beds out of one dorm room and put it in one, and then were using the other one as a rehearsal space.
Yeah, oh my God. And Ben was very punk. So he put like some sort of crepe paper or something on the wall so that he could spray paint all over everything. And it was like 1101 in the Brittany was just a little crazy town. It was ground central. So many like drunken and stone nights. That's where we first started getting into the habit of like getting stoned and watching Buster Keaton and stuff like that. That's probably where we first did the whole thing of writing down nonsense on little strips of paper, and then you pull it out of the hat, and you're supposed to write a sketch within 15 minutes or something like that, and then have to read it to the group.
Wow.
Yeah. We had no improv education and no sketch comedy education, so we realized years later that, of course, Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and especially The Muppet Show had an effect on us. But also early SNL, because, when we were all like 5, 6, 7 years old, we were sneaking downstairs late at night on Saturday to see the original cast.
Right.
But I think more than anything, Monty Python were kind of our heroes. And that more than anything probably convinced us that things should be written, because sketches like the argument sketch, which are just to the words so beautifully written and memorized and performed as if very naturalistically.
Right.
We loved that stuff. Yeah.
So, you guys, after graduating college, I know some of you didn't graduate, and there's sort of a fun tangent where some people became Ninja Turtles for a minute, and then, which I loved that part of the story. Again, read the book; it's fascinating. We're here to talk about Kevin, but you guys ran the show kind of off Broadway from it, or sort of in a small downtown theater?
Yeah,
or ran something.
To call it off Broadway, it's a bit of a stretch. Yeah, it was. We ran it we ran our best of show, the best of the work we had done at school, at the Gene Frankel Theater, and I remember like there weren't things like UCB or Second City or anything like that, so we had to like borrow like from our parents, and our managers somehow raised some money to pay like, I don't know, something like $7,000 or something to rent this theater for us for a few weekends, where we put on this show that we were able to bring people from MTV and ABC to come see it. And that's what really got us started.
Oh, that's interesting. That, and we'll get back to ABC, obviously, later in the but that's interesting that on some level, ABC was always in the conversation
Yeah,
from day one. So the show happens. So you guys get on MTV, and I mean, this is. I don't know how this could ever happen again, or in any other way that 11 people get to remain as part of the group, and I really respected, at least early on, everyone's commitment to each other as an ensemble.
Yeah.
And, I think one thing they talked about was Ken Marino, who's a big star now and has done lots of, the other two, and what's the catering one?
Party Down.
Party Down
yeah.
and everything. But, that you guys had done a showcase, and he was offered something. He was sort of offered
From
a retainer
ABC.
from ABC,
Yeah.
and he turned it down without anything else in his hand for you guys to get this as a group, which is just so respectable, in my opinion. So you get the show on MTV, and you guys are 21, 20...
We would have been 23, I guess, when we first got You Wrote It, You Watch It.
I forget. I always forget about
maybe
that step.
22.
Right. Tell me more about, what was that show? What was the...
Well, it's interesting that Chappelle had such success with that whole thing where you interview someone and then do dramatic reenactments.
Yes.
Because the premise of You Wrote It, You Watch It, they were like, MTV was like, people will write in letters, people who watch MTV will write in letters of crazy things that have happened to them, and then sketch comedy groups will do reenactments, right? So we were one of maybe, I don't know, 8 or so different like groups that had been put together to do stuff, and we recognized immediately, we were like, fuck letters.
Right.
We should have people on camera telling stories, and then we dress as them and reenact them. So we started doing that, and
And that show's hosted by Jon Stewart.
that show was hosted by Jon
And
Stewart.
did he have any sort of a name before that, or was that kind of his first, I guess, stand-up? Or
Yeah, he had been doing stand-up. I remember seeing him at about the time that they were, courting us and introducing us. I remember we went to see him somewhere, and really being impressed with him because he was able to be kind of Carlin-esque and political even when he was first starting out. But anyway, we got along great with him. He liked us, and MTV finally, after the first season of that show, was like, no one else is really making this thing pop. Let's just give John his own show, which was just called, I think, the Jon Stewart Show at first, his own talk show, and give the state their own show. So that's how it started.
And at very little budget. I mean, particularly for, like, that's the one thing, I think, even still, I think we all have this romantic idea that once there's a camera in front of you, somehow everything else has been taken care of at that point. That now you're fine with money, now you're fine with success, everything. And like, I mean, you guys were still had roommates.
The story that inspired the creation of my podcast, Risk, was how I tried sex work for the first time the weekend before we finally found out we had been picked up by him, because they made us contractually wait for 6 months. They waited until the last day because we had made a pilot for them, and they wanted our name. They wanted to own the name The State so that they could hire and fire whoever of us they wanted to and have it still be The State. So that's why the show is officially called MTV's The State.
Right.
But there's some sort of contractual thing in there that you can't pull us apart. And yeah, like we couldn't do anything else because contractually we were not supposed to appear in any other like performing arts kind of things. And we were starting to starve, and my roommate was like, well, have you ever thought of prostitution?
Constantly. Was it a one-time deal, or was there a
It
period?
was a two-time deal. The one-time deal is the story that got on Risk, which is a comedy of errors and very funny. And I once performed it for Seth Barish, who is Mike Birbiglia's director, and he was like, that story is so goddamn funny, but part of me feels like there's something sad you're leaving out. And I'm like, yeah, well, okay, I didn't quit that night. I tried it a second night, and it was successful, but it was like, it was sad, like I wasn't, well, first of all, not being attracted to older guys, that doesn't make you very much in line to be in that line of work. So yeah, oh God, yeah. I went home with a Vietnam vet, and I was
like you do.
I was so not wanting to go to his bedroom that I just kept drinking beers and asking him what Vietnam was like. And the next morning, he, I kind of laid there when it was time to play. And the next morning, he left like $275 in a dish next to me.
That's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was. And he said, come on down. He wrote a note. I'm in the diner downstairs. And I went down. And he was like, yeah, I don't think this is going to work. He was like, you really kind of spoiled things by asking so much about Vietnam. I'm like, clearly my subconscious meant to do that. Oh my God. So anyway, yes, I did get
So you had to fall
home.
back on acting because sex work didn't work out for you. So.
It was that night that I got home, and my roommate was like, who was really getting like, get the rent, who had suggested sex work to begin with. But he was like, oh, there's a message you're going to want to hear on the phone machine. And it was the news that we had been picked up for series.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, and that pilot, I have not been able to find the pilot yet.
Yeah, I think that the pilot was ultimately chopped up. So there are bits of the pilot throughout the show. But the pilot itself, it might be on the DVD if you have the real DVD.
I don't. Now, I had, when I was in college, all you could find was skits and stickers, which was sort of a best of that we watched all the time. Because once I got to college and found my pack of weirdos, they all too also were, MTV The State people. So we watched that a lot. I think I owned a bootleg copy that I bought on VHS from eBay, where, that was like just, a bunch of VHS tapes. Then I think I had a bootleg of on somebody had burned on DVD. I've never seen the original pilot, but because it was so MTV, they were using tons of current music at the time.
Right.
So part of the reason why it took them, from what I understand, a long time to be able to. Now you can stream it on Paramount. I recommend it. It's so good. Still. But that because of all the music rights for, and it is weird going back and watching, like, for instance, Cannonball is so intrinsic to the Pants, sketch in my book. And to see it, and they've done a good job with sort of
sound alike,
sounding-ish kind of, but if you know, and you're like, this is supposed to be Cannonball.
Yeah, and the same thing happened to Beavis and Butthead. I don't know what they've been able to put out again.
Right.
But yeah, that really
because that's just them
too,
watching music
almost
videos.
Only music videos.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, they were not, very upfront with us about all of that. They were like, oh yeah, there'll never be any problems. Wallpaper this thing with music.
That's nothing to worry about, kid. I'm going to make you a star. Now, as far as the chemistry with you being the only gay guy, so I guess, because a lot of times when you have ensemble and you're spending so much time together, sex becomes an issue at some point.
Oh.
So obviously, I guess with there being all heterosexuals and you, that was not an issue. What about with Carrie? Was there ever anything romantic with her and any of the guys in the group?
Gosh, I don't think so.
That is so lucky.
I mean, there were things between Carrie and Craig Wedren, who did the theme music for the show, close friend of the group's. and Charles Gonza, also a good friend of the group. So people who were near the group, but I think she was really smart
Yeah.
to avoid anything with anyone in the group. And I was not so smart because I was pretty much in love with Ben Grant, like throughout most of college and all our time on MTV,
He's
and
so
told
cute.
him I don't know if
I don't
know if
blame
that was
you.
smart, but no, everyone kind of knew, and we're just like, what can you do,
Yeah.
It was kind of a growing.
Are you the one that
pains
kept putting
thing.
him in a singlet? Is that?
But no, it was me getting over falling in love with straight guys.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Well,
That was
I
the
just think
last
it was
one.
impossible
Yeah.
back then. Because again, we never met anyone. Who else were we supposed to fall in love
Yeah,
with? We
yeah.
only met straight people or closeted gay people.
Yeah, and then that ends up really screwing your psychology because all your formative, or speaking personally,
Sure.
all my formative experiences were putting someone up on a pedestal thinking, oh, he's Beauty, I'm the Beast. If he ever found out who I really am,
Yeah.
he'd hate me, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Totally. Uh, the show runs 4 seasons, and then I guess because in my mind it was such a huge show, but I think it was just a huge show in my world.
Yeah.
Because I mean I was just watching MTV. If I was watching TV, it was probably MTV. I mean because I was just of that demographic that it was totally targeted at, and I think you guys felt the same. That it was sort of a big show, and so the original, I guess, golden carrot that was dangled for you guys was that you were going to take the show. Your contract ended with MTV. And you were going to take the show to primetime on ABC to try to compete with SNL.
Yes, that was the idea, that we would, go right up against SNL. And I think, wasn't Mad TV was also up against
Yeah, I guess that would have been
SNL
around the
at
same time
time?
which may have been what ended up eating y'all's lunch to
Right,
some degree.
Right.
Because it was a little more mainstream in a way.
Yeah, exactly. MTV or ABC pulled out of that, and then we were left going over to CBS. And, the whole thing is so tragic because I don't think we even our management was not the sharpest and maybe not the most honest with us.
And you were kids.
Yeah. We didn't know that MTV was about to be available to 25 million more homes. And we didn't know, I'm pretty sure we didn't know they were offering us 5 more seasons.
Yeah.
It's just that they weren't offering us a raise. And, that is saying a lot because we would go to unemployment.
Yeah.
And our checks were about the same size as our checks.
And you guys
from
were
MTV.
working, I mean, I guess if you count the drinking, 24 hours a day.
Totally, and we were doing editing and producing, and like we had our hands. We were all like guerrilla filmmakers from NYU.
Absolutely, and I guess the argument that would have been told to you, again being young and everything, and that you should just be grateful, to be here because look, you're on TV. But there's 11 of you. If it were 5 of you, it would be easier. But the fact that you guys were the writing staff, the directors, the all of it, 11 isn't that big of a show.
Right. And I had so many self-esteem issues and confidence issues around being gay and how out to be.
Right.
But also just general self-esteem and confidence issues. So I was obsessed with the fact that the group was kind of a protective womb to be in, like it was safety in numbers.
Yeah.
And so when the group did fall on hard times, and first, CBS didn't work, and then we tried to make a movie with Disney, and that didn't work. And eventually the group broke up, and I was really freaked out. I did not handle that era of my life very well.
Well, I can imagine because, and this is something. Until I read the book, and in part one of the main reasons because I have always wanted to know. Because I think, like you just touched on, there was the ABC deal that fell through. That it was like, oh, actually we have something different. It's going to be CBS, and you guys did this Halloween special. which when I think Halloween special, I think Paul Lynde, is the first thing that that comes to mind. That didn't even have anything lasting, or anything promised past that, which was just the Halloween special.
Right, but to us, they had promised at least 2 more, maybe 3 more specials. So the next one was going to be New Year's Eve, and it was contractual. But what's his name? Les Moonves had been hired that week to take over CBS, and I think that he was just like, wait, who are these kids?
Right.
Okay, wait, they're just on one spot. Yeah, fuck that. Like I don't have time to think, and they just fired us.
Well, and also a couple fun sort of history things that I read. One, you wanted to have Blues Traveler on as part of the special, and then SNL rips Blues Traveler out from under you at the last second,
forgot
and then you
that.
end up putting Sonic Youth on, which is exactly what CBS needed at that moment. Was if you want to reach the old Sonic Youth, it's going to be the way to break through to
After Murder, She Wrote.
I think is so funny. And then you guys get an article with Details Magazine. It's so funny because I'm reading this and it's like Details Magazine, Sonic Youth, Blues Traveler, Jon Stewart, Dennis Leary. I mean, it is like a word search for late 90s. I mean, just like pop culture. I had a subscription to Details Magazine. It was kind of the hip, cool, young dudes magazine. And I think this guy was a fan. And I think he genuinely came in to write about how much he loved the state, but was there during this train wreck of
At
and,
CBS.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then ended up kind of doing a hit job on you guys.
He's the same fella who wrote the piece about David Foster Wallace that they ended up making a movie about the relationship between the two of them. And I think it was a very similar thing. I forget his name, but this particular journalist just had a thing about like becoming obsessed with artists, but also having a love-hate relationship
Right.
with them. So when there was this Archie Bunker like
Pike something.
yes
yeah.
head programming guy at CBS who, he kind of looked like Dick Cheney, and he had this very just like old school attitude about things.
Not your demographic.
Yeah, exactly. Like not the kind of person who would get us at all. And in our first meeting with him, he said he said some racist stuff.
Yeah.
That like completely like left us a little bit shell-shocked. And coming out of that meeting, there was Lipsky was the name of the writer.
Right.
There was Lipsky in the hallway, and he saw these expressions of shock on our faces. And I don't know. I think it might have been David or Showalter. I know that I was one of the people who confirmed it at one point
Right.
along the line, which was probably a mistake. Anyway, Lipsky got the
gist.
gist of what the guy had said, and so by the time the Details thing came out, we had already been fired from CBS. We were in the Bahamas making our record at that time, and he was fired immediately. It was on CNN and Time and Newsweek. He was an actually canceled person.
Yeah, sure.
Because of that. But I don't think that did us any
Well, and you
any favors in the industry at that time.
Would you just mention the album? So ABC falls through, CBS falls through, MTV falls through, but I did feel like reading that maybe at least there would have been a window at any time you guys could have gone back with your hat in your hand and been our bad.
Which was my thing. I was arguing we should either go back to MTV or go back to Comedy Central, which was like the sister channel.
Yeah.
And because it was some of the people at Comedy Central had previously worked with us at MTV. So I was like, either of those two places, just ask if we can do a revamped version of the show.
Right.
And there were members of the group who were starting to feel that being in an 11-member group was holding them down, and that doing the same old show was not, exciting enough anymore. And it's so tragic because it really is in the third and fourth seasons that we get a lot weirder.
Yeah.
And it would have been really interesting to see what would have happened if we would have just gone on at MTV.
Also, the fact that what makes it work is how young you guys were. I don't know how much older you guys could have even pulled. I mean, but so like you mentioned, all that's gone. And then you go as an entire unit, somebody hands you a bag of money and says, go to the Bahamas and make a comedy album, which in context does make sense. I mean, because this is when, Adam Sandler is making so much money with comedy albums. And, I had an Ellen DeGeneres, Taste This, that I listened to until the wheels fell off, and Chris Rock's, first comedy. So at the time, comedy albums you could make a ton of money with comedy albums. So it makes sense, but y'all just went and got hammered. And
we were at Compass Point. I think Compass Point doesn't exist anymore, but it was legendary. Bob Marley, Talking Heads, like so many groups had recorded down there. And I mean, it's just the atmosphere of, everyone's drinking like pina coladas or whatever all the time. There's weed everywhere. And we would play during the daytime and then go into the studio at night. And oftentimes we were doing written sketches, which is what we're good at.
Right.
But then other times we were like, just let's try improv. And some of
turn on the
those-
mics and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Some of those are just like, oh my God, what is going on?
So how long were
here?
you actually there working on that project?
Probably a little over a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did the album get released, or does it exist?
Well, it got released by, was it Rhino? It got released by one of those labels years later that releases stuff that, for collectors and stuff. But no, Warner Brothers never released it.
Oh, that's right. It was Warner Brothers that had originally.
Yeah.
And then there was a travel book where
State by state with the state. Yeah.
which is where I think you would have probably shined, because it was a storytelling, but it sounds like the
totally.
rest of them phoned it in. But
Yeah, no, it is funny because on both the record and the book, I did kind of shine it. And in our recent tour show too, people have commented on how, boy, there's a lot of Kevin in it. And I'm like, yeah, it is interesting that as soon as we were no longer on television,
right.
I seem to be doing better in the group.
I do want to stop and say, when he walked in today to film this, the first thing he said was, "Oh, I didn't know we were going to be on camera." So then, all that goes. I think true fans of the show and the subsequent projects that came from it, and there have been some tremendous ones that have. That is, I mean, is it fair to say that people went into different corners and you were kind of left kind of like, what do I do?
Yeah, I call that period my belly of the whale period, because what happened was several members of the group started the show Viva Variety,
Right.
and the other 8 or whatever of us there were felt very betrayed at the time, because it had been a state sketch that now they were using our crew and studio and everything to make a show out of, just without the other 8 of us.
And you guys were all at the premiere, right?
Yeah, and they invited us to the first taping. And so after that, there was a meeting where it was kind of bloody, where there was even talk of maybe, might there be a lawsuit or something like that. And so it was a very ugly sort of end. But Viva Variety ended up moving out to Los Angeles, so that started, splitting up the extent to which we were even like all still in communication in a big way. And then Stella started in New York, Showalter Wayne and Black. And then a whole kind of comedy world sort of formed around that, which then became Wet Hot American Summer.
Which is one of my all-time favorites. That I was surprised, because, even Carrie makes an appearance in the outtakes of the movie. That one surprises me, that because, you do make, you're in Reno 911 the movie, right? Or you're not Miami.
Yeah. And I think I was either in, I think I was in an episode of Viva Variety at one point.
Right.
the Reno 911 movie, the first Reno 911 movie. But no, one of my greatest like regrets is that I was not in Wet Hot.
Yeah. Which seems so, especially when, like, because one thing that, and I don't want to harp on projects you're not in, but, the sex scene, the gay sex scene in Wet Hot American Summer, that is one, they just really, sure, the camera pulls away like you would in any sex scene, but they really go for it. And they treat two heterosexual actors playing, but my thought was like, you didn't even get the role of the gay guy in Wet Hot American Summer.
I know. And it was, I think, largely because I had become kind of hurt and bitter and was struggling with a lot of stage fright and social anxiety too. So I think the group just sensed that Kevin's really off in his own universe now. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I if I could turn back time, I would, have recognized at that time, look, you didn't make much money with the state, so you have to keep, things going. Like UCB started shortly somewhere around there, and if I had been smarter, I would have just, whether or not it was with the state or with over there by the UCB folks, just kept very active and on and just having things happening. I was too obsessed with like survival jobs.
Yeah, you end up going back. I did a lot of catering when I was cater waitering when I was in my 20s. So you end up going back. So you've had a show on it. Again, this is I think the fantasy that we all have when we're younger, that once you make it, you've made it. Not the fact that almost in a way it just keeps getting harder and harder and harder to sustain.
Yeah.
So you end up going back to cater waitering. And I do want to tee you up because I mentioned this before you sat down. I heard an interview once with you a long time ago, and I tried to find it when I was preparing for this show, but you end up working... you've already had a successful show on MTV, and you end up working the VIP room at the Grammys. Is that right?
Yeah. And the show was still in reruns, I believe, at that point. So people were still seeing me on TV. And I was behind this little bar, this champagne bar, in the VIP room at the Grammys. And Sarah McLachlan comes walking through the door. And then she realizes right next to her is Aretha Franklin. So she says, oh my God, Aretha, can I get you a glass of champagne? So they mosey up to the bar. And then Sarah McLachlan looks up at me and she says, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? And Aretha's like, huh? And Sarah McLachlan said, oh, he's a famous comedian. And Aretha looked at me and went, mm-hmm. So that was...
God, I could just feel that in my bones.
It's the lowest of low. Yeah. But at the same time, I love that it's so funny.
Yeah, cater waitering in New York is a trip because you are working for the richest people. And I preferred cater waitering when I was younger, even though it could be, I remember having a moment where I thought, I've got to figure out how to get on the other side of this silver tray. But, you're dealing with the super rich and these fabulous parties, and there was one of my last catering events that I was catering with a female comedian, and must have just read on my face how miserable I was to be there. I'd actually already started a company at that point, but just still needed the income.
Yeah.
And she said, you've got to... Why don't you smile? It's not that bad. And I could have stabbed her with a fork. And then a week later, she's on The Daily Show, and she's a pretty incredibly famous person now. And I think about that every time I see her on TV, I'm like, God damn it.
I do remember working with a fella who is a successful actor now. And he said, well, if you're going to be doing, he was referring to how we.
Right.
He was like, if you're going to be doing something, you might as well do it as well as you can. And I was like, what?
How about I fold it into a swan and shove it up your ass? So then you I'm trying to figure out how to get into this. You are on your 15th season of Risk, is that correct?
Yeah, we turned 15 in October. It's so overwhelming that it's lasted this long. And we're in this era now where the entire podcasting industry is just like really having a hard time.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Oh, gosh. So, yeah, I mean, risk means so much to so many people. I
Yeah.
get emails on a daily basis of people saying, "Oh my God, I didn't kill myself because of this show," or "This saved my marriage," or "Oh, my kid got off of heroin," or whatever it was after I listened to this episode with them. So, risk, like the stories are more raw and intimate and emotional and often hilarious and sometimes filthy.
Right.
Than they could do on like The Moth or something like that, or definitely anything on NPR. So it's very, very uncensored and very, but it has a lot of heart.
And how did it come to be? I mean,
I was, after the state broke up, the one thing that I was doing was character shows. So I would do a solo show of like 3 to 5 different characters, right? And I was doing it in 2008. I was doing a show out in San Francisco at San Francisco Sketch Fest. And it was a terrible night. Like the microphone wasn't working, the air conditioning wasn't working. Michael Ian Black was there, and not many other people were there. And afterwards, I said to him, "What'd you think?" And he said, "I mean, the characters are funny, and the monologues are all funny and all, but I think most of the audience would have preferred if you'd have just come out on stage and like been yourself and tell your own stories, because your own stories are so
right.
crazy." And I said, "Oh, that feels too risky." And he said, "If it feels risky, that's a sign that,
Right.
you're opening up, and the audience might open up to you." So I flew back to New York after Sketchfest, and on the plane I was thinking, okay, I've heard of these storytelling shows. I had never been to one. I was like, what's the riskiest true story from my life I could tell? And it was about doing sex
Right,
work that
right.
weekend before the state was picked up. And so I tried it out at UCB at a show that Margot Lightman was hosting. And I got so nervous beforehand, I called her the day of that I said, "I don't think I can do this." And she said, "Oh my God, that's such great news." I was like, "Oh, why? Are you overbooked?" She was like, No. My show is all people sharing stories about sex. And
Right.
if someone calls on the day of and says, "Oh, this is too risky feeling, but I can convince them to do it
Yeah.
anyway," that's the one that's going to bring the house down. So she convinced me, and I did it. And it was just such an electric experience of feeling like, oh, I'm conversing with the audience, And every time I revealed something that was more embarrassing or bizarre, they were leaning in forward more. So I knew I was onto something. And I walked down 8th Avenue away from UCB that night, and the entire idea for the show occurred to me. I was like, it's got to be a live show so that I get over my stage fright and I'm just regularly telling stories on stage. It's got to be something more than just a small theater show. So I'll make a podcast out of it because,
Right.
I've got to reach more people. And I thought it would be interesting because I grew up like loving like radio dramas and stuff like that. I was like, it should have both live
Sort of
stories
Prairie
and
Home
stories.
Companion kind of a...
Well, more like the Monty Python records, Free to Be You and Me,
Okay, cool.
like the
Yeah.
sketchy feeling stuff. So I was like, so there should be a lot of audio play on it as well, not just stories told live in front of an audience. Some of them can be told experimentally with music and sound design added. So I started the show, and it had the wind at its back right from the beginning, because everyone I told about it, like Mark Maron was in the first ever Risk show.
And you've had Margaret Cho, and you've had a lot of really great...
Yeah, we've had lots of big names on the show over the years. But Mark sat down with me after the show in another room, and we were at this punk rock club where we did the very first Risk show. And he was like, "This is great. Like, this is a great idea. I can introduce you to some people who can like tell you how to record shit for a podcast." So that's how it all got going, and it became pretty popular right away. And now we're 15 years in.
And I had a really fun Risk experience last week, and I think it's so, having listened. Now I've heard the show before. A couple of my really good friends who are comedians, Peyton Clarkson, who's one of my best friends from college, has one that you've done the music, and you've played with the format a little bit over the years, because sometimes you take a story and you add in sound effects, and his is a particularly. I mean, I remember the weekend that he and Hilton went up there, and that happened, which is a nut story. Listen to it. It's on the Risk podcast, Peyton Clarkson. It's so good. Calvin Cato is a very good friend of mine. But one of my best friends, Bobby Hankinson, which is a perfect time to plug this, wrote this book, Queendom, which has a bunch of queer comedians, including Kevin Allison, Zach Zimmerman, Tim Dunn. I mean, just a lot of really great. Unfortunately, it came out right before Bobby and I met, so I'm not in it. But his story, whiz kid, it's filthy. I'm not going to ruin it, but get the book. You should read it. So I'm hanging out with Bobby one night, and this is when I'm in between relationships. And I have this sexual experience, which is very out of the box for me. and Bobby and I are sitting on the couch smoking weed, and I tell him about this story, and we're laughing our balls off. And I was like, can I tell this story on stage? And he was like, if you don't tell this story on stage, I'm going to tell it on stage. And so I had written it up, and I have performed it twice. I think I did it once I run 7 open mics a week. So I think I did it once at one of my open mics, and it worked. And then I did it in a show, and it kind of didn't work. And then last year at the the New Orleans Queer Comedy Festival, I did it on a late night dirty show, and it kind of worked. But it is more storytelling than it is stand-up.
Right.
And so I went to your show the other night. I let him know I was coming. I wanted to see it live before I interviewed him. And unbeknownst to me, part of the format for this particular show was, he did a story, another person came on, a couple more stories, he did another story, there was an intermission, and during the second half, he was going to pick 3 stories from people in the audience to do the story. And when I had first talked to Bobby about this, I was like, this would be if I really want to do Risk one day, if I ever get a chance to do Risk, this is the story I want to do on Risk. But I hadn't done it since last year at the comedy festival. So I'm sitting there all through the first half, kind of making notes to myself, and like, because if I get up there and eat shit right before I meet you, this is not going to be the best introduction to, can't wait to have you on my show this week, thanks. So I went back and forth. I was like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then again, with the show being called Risk and the theme of all, I was like, just do it. So I threw my name in the hat. I did end up getting picked. I did do the story, and so it was sort of an accident.
And it went fabulously. By the way, we should say not eating shit literally, because those stories are But no, it went so fun, and I loved that because. Is it okay if I say what it's about?
Please,
because it's a story about fisting, and I mean, I've told many kinky stories on Risk, but I was like, gosh, I realized I've never told a story about me fisting anyone anymore. So I was able to make all these clarifications for everyone of things you had referenced in the story. But no, that was so ideal for Risk, Yeah.
It was a fun night, and the show is so good, and you have to see it live, and you have to listen to it. And this interview was everything I wanted to be. Oh, but do plug real quick, you're doing a trip to Portugal, right?
Oh, yeah. In October, we're inviting all Risk fans or friends to come to Portugal with us to celebrate our 15th anniversary. There's this fella who reached out to us who runs travel tours over there, and he was like, I want to throw a big party for Risk in Portugal and make it like there's like a 9-day option and a 3-day option of wine and food and sightseeing and all this stuff, and we were like, sure, we'll do that with
Bobby is obsessed with Portugal. His best friend lives there. I need to talk to him about it. We may do this. So anyway, watch the show, listen to the show. This was everything I wanted to be. I'm so glad I got to talk to you and the whole history of the state and Risk. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a fabulous hour. Bye, y'all.
It's Drew Tessier's Mostly Queer Comedy Show.